Action movies make billions of dollars each year by appealing to broad audiences. According to Eric Netter, an author and reviewer published in the Hudson Review in September of 2018.
I'm guessing that most of you in this room have at least seen or heard about one of these movies we're about to list, such as The Titanic,
Mad Max,
It,
Elf,
or Frozen. 5 major movie genres have developed throughout American history.
Today we will be informing you about 5 different movie genres, which include romance, action, horror, comedy, and family. To begin, let's first discuss romance.
Romance is defined by positive emotions for the audience. According to Jerry Roberts, a senior editor and freelance writer, in his article found on the Variety website, written in October 26th of 1998, stated that everyone everywhere likes to feel special, singular, and unique. It affirms the desire in the individual themselves. People everywhere go to movie theaters to get in touch with their romantic feelings. He then goes on to talk about what these kinds of movies entail. Usually it's a love story or an affair of the heart that centers on passion and positive emotions. Usually it has a leading male and a leading female, and it talks about their love story, which usually results in a marriage or an engagement. Romance is like other genres in that love is the main focus of the plot, although it can mix with other genres, such as action, romance, or it can be a rom-com, which is a romantic comedy. Love can still be involved in other genres, it just varies in the level of importance it plays in the plot. Jerry Roberts then goes on to talk about how interests are very cyclical. People are more so worried about the picture rather than what the actual genre is. There's a lot of global unrest, and people are worried about their futures, so they use a romance to get in touch and make them feel good. Now that we've talked about the traits, let's talk about how romance has evolved throughout the ages.
The focus of romance movies has changed since its creation. This is by Henry Kulick, a freelance author and researcher, published on the In Focus Film School website on July 14, 2017. He states that previously, romance movies followed a male lead to act as the catalyst in the relationship, leading to the true love. This was true in the very first romance movie ever created in the 1890s. It was called The May Irwin Kiss, and featured 2 strangers meeting and falling in love and then kissing, all in a matter of 18 seconds. Audiences at that time thought it was kind of weird that 2 physically unattractive people would kiss on such a large screen, but audiences nowadays don't really mind too much about physical appearance as they're more invested into the story, and typically in a battle of physical appearance root for the underdog. But audiences today have also kind of changed the way that they want to see a romance movie. They're now looking for a more female lead-based movie, leading to the now female buddy romance movie. Some modern examples of this type of movie include Trainwreck, Ocean's 11, and the all-female cast of Ghostbusters. This genre that was once raking in over $100 million per movie with the male lead has now raked in more and more money with the new female buddy model. Now that we have talked about romance movies, we will move on to our second movie genre, action.
Action movies is our second movie genre. We'll be going into how they are defined and how they have developed over the years. On how they are defined, action movies are defined by, well, action, as one might expect. They target young audiences with a bright, flashy thing and keep them engaged by keeping them adding and adding to what happens in the film, according to Naher, as previously cited. They also emphasize things such as fight scenes, car chases, explosions, special effects, and stunt work, according to Kendrick. Kendrick being an author and professor published in the Oxford University Press in the 15th of January 2015. He goes on to say that action movies have leaked into nearly every other movie genre because of their plot-driving effect. Though most action movies themselves have very little plot and rely more on the big flashy effects to actually get things done, they still show up in other movies. Things like science fiction, horror, and a variety of others all contain elements of action movies. But now that we've talked about how action movies are defined, we'll now go into how they have developed over the years.
Action movies started in around the 1910s with chase films, where people are running away from things, according to Kendrick, as previously said. These movies were relative flops until, according to O'Brien, a professor of film in the Columbia University Press in November 20th of 2012, they became their own genre. And this was around in the 1970s and 80s. These new action movies targeted societal issues of the time, such as the neo-Nazism of the World War II, or the neo-imperialism of the Cold War, or the takeover of machines with the rise of automation. These movies also tackled the atrocities of war as seen in movies like the Bond films and the Terminator films. These movies have since, according to NetHair, transitioned into more superhero films, with movies like Iron Man, Wonder Woman, and the Avengers. Now that we have talked about action, let us now discuss horror.
Most people go to horror movies to get a feeling of entertainment, horror, dread, or often disgust. According to Thomas Fay, who is an associate professor and director of the American Studies program at Long Island University, in his book titled The Philosophy of Horror, published on April 16th of 2010, stated that horror movies have two main elements. These are either the evil supernatural or the monstrous. This can include the psychopath who kills monstrously. He also went on to say that the horror genre plays upon the viewer's thoughts, making them feel like these actual monsters are represented in his or her thoughts, and that horror is combined in many different genres, such as fantasy, mystery, suspense, and many more. According to Neil Terry, who is a business professor at West Texas A&M University, and others in their article, last updated in 2010, stated that many people enjoy going to the horror movies to be taken into a world of the unknown and immersed into a world of fear and imagination. They like to find different novels, movies, and TV shows of their favorite horror books, movies, and shows because there's endless variations of the same sort of movie. The average budget for a horror movie is normally under $27 million, whereas the average profit is normally over $45 million. Paranormal films really didn't become popular, though, until 1973, when The Exorcist first came out. After that, it became a very popular genre, and then it brought on the slasher movies, or so-called crazed killers. This started out with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Friday the 13th. A great example of a horror movie is the movie It. This was written by Stephen King in 1986 and became a motion picture in 2017. From this movie, there was a roller coaster of fear, jump scares, and love, laughter, and fear.
Now that you've talked about some defining traits, let's talk about how horror films have evolved throughout the ages. According to Peter Hutchings, a film director, in his book titled The Horror Film, published in 2004, stated that since the 1930s, there's never been a time when these types of films were not being created in large numbers, or when these films were not being criticized, censored, or even banned. According to Alexander Swanson, a professor at Indiana University, in his article last updated in 2015, stated that the reactions, the thoughts, and the desires of the audience help towards specific market campaigning, towards a direct audience or a theater audience, using spooky, rousing gimmickry in order to get the audience into the seats to watch these kinds of films. Since the 1950s, the creators of these movies have used things such as monster chillers and creature features to get the people into the audience. They've also used things such as 3D, smell-o-vision, and percepto, like in the 1959 version of The Tingler, written by William Castle. According to Stephen Prince, a professor of cinema at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, in his book also titled The Horror Film, which is part of his series, published in 2004, stated that there's a large amount of evidence that has linked medical cases to the viewing of these kinds of movies. Specifically, there's psychiatric case studies done about the level of anxiety in the individual and how many days they were in the hospital, spanning from several days to several weeks. According to the British Medical Journal, it talks about a 10-year-old's reaction to the viewing of a TV show called Ghostwatch. In this, the 10-year-old was induced with television-induced post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as TV PTSD. He had to be hospitalized for 8 weeks. Other patients in these kinds of studies had shown no previous stressors but had higher amount of medical care needed from the viewing of these kinds of movies. Now that we have discussed horror, we can move on to something more lighthearted, such as our fourth genre, which is comedy.
Comedy movies can be defined by laughter and enjoyment in the audience. This is why they're able to reach such a wide variety of audiences from the ages of young to old and all different types of ethnicities. This information comes from Mark Weeks, a professor at the University of Indiana, published on the Journal of Modern Literature in 2011. Jokes in comedy movies can trigger the pleasure centers in the brain releasing dopamine, causing the viewer to have enjoyment, making them laugh and smile. And comedy movies many times featured comedy-specific actors, such as Will Ferrell playing Buddy the Elf or Anchorman. These actors also play comedy-specific roles. These actors are good at two different types of comedy, verbal and nonverbal. There's much debate about which is more difficult to accomplish, but there is an agreement that in modern audiences today, they're both very difficult to pull off. The first type of comedy, verbal, is the one you and I probably know best as jokes. Verbal comedy in movies starts with a setup of a joke and then a payoff. An example of this would be the joke setup of why are there fences around graveyards with the payoff of because people are dying to get in. Now, you probably wouldn't see that type of joke in a feature film on the big screen, but it's a good example of an everyday joke that you could hear that has a setup and a payoff. The second type of comedy is nonverbal. This started in the early 1920s with the first nonverbal comedy producer, Charlie Chaplin. The technology in the 1920s wasn't at the level it is today, so you couldn't record audio. So if you wanted to do comedy in movies, you had to do it non-verbally. This information and the following comes from Charles Malin, an American literature professor at the University of Tennessee, published on the Wiley Online Library on November 13, 2011.
Nonverbal comedy is normally over-exaggerated. For instance, getting out of bed is really easy, but in a nonverbal comedy, you may see the person getting stuck in their covers, then flailing around, then ending up falling on the floor. To the audience, this can be hilarious. Now, today we use a lot more props instead of nonverbals, and a lot more verbal comedy, because today's audience seems to laugh more at that. In the past 24 years, the comedy industry has made over $34 billion, and a great example of a comedy movie is the movie Elf. This has both good verbal and nonverbal. An example of verbal in the movie is the part when Buddy the Elf is left alone in the apartment and hears some crazy noise and thinks it's a monster. He then goes and calls his dad to find out that it's actually the radiator. A little bit later, you see some nonverbal in the part where Buddy the Elf walks in expecting to see a big scary boss who turns out to be a 4'4" actor. This is a great example of comedy, and now we will be moving on to our fifth and final genre, family.
Family is known for its targeting at young audiences. These audiences are children ages 12 and under, according to Tim Dirks, a senior film reviewer on FilmSite in 2015. These movies tend to be suitable for all audiences due to their low target. According to Foster, a professor of cinema, in the current review for academic libraries in July of 2013, these movies tend to be fantasy films. There is some fantastical journey through a fantastical world with fantastical creatures. These creatures then help the protagonists along their way to get to some destination. These movies, according to Dirks, also tend to teach a lesson or moral, or show good overcoming evil. Now that we have talked about what defines a family film, let us now talk about the evolution.
Family films started in the early 1920s with young child actors such as Shirley Temple teaching a lesson or going on a short adventure in the big screen, according to Dirks, as previously cited. This then evolved into the animations we see today, mainly in the 40s, with the advent of Disney and the creation of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was a huge boost to the family genre and continues to be seen today. Animation slowly developed and was a big part of it, but with all family movies, they went down in the 1960s due to the Vietnam War and the terrors and horrible things attached with it. People didn't want to go to any movies, but family movies, ones teaching a lesson or trying to be happy, were especially hard hit. This continued on for a short bit after the war, but then they rebounded. Modern movies that are family-based genres are inclusive of Coco, Moana, The Incredibles, Toy Story, and a variety of others, all of which were created in our youth and continue to affect us today. They were created by companies such as Fox, Disney, Illuminations, and a variety of others in order to gather young people's attention and the older adults. This is the last of our 5 movie genres.
Today we have informed you about 5 major movie genres, which included romance, action, horror, comedy, and family.
5 major movie genres have developed throughout American history.
Now let's go back to what Naher said in the beginning. Every time you go in to watch a movie or are either scrolling through Netflix, think about this billion-dollar industry and how it has evolved throughout the ages.